Welcome. My name is Zinnia Willits, and I am the Executive Director of the Southeastern Museums Conference. A warm welcome to all our members joining us from across the region today, and a special welcome to all those who may be new to SEMC. SEMC is a regional professional organization representing museums and museum professionals in the 12 southeastern states, as well as in the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. We have a membership of around 1,500 and continue to grow. I will take this moment to point out that we are running a membership special this week where new, renewing, or lapsed members can join SEMC as an individual member for just $25. SEMC's membership manager, Carla Phillips, is also here with us today to assist and can give you all the information you need in the chat. I'm thrilled to kick off our 2021 virtual program series with this talk focused on Whitney Plantation in Wallace, Louisiana. Ashley Rogers, the Executive Director, is here with us today to discuss Whitney's evolution, and this talk will be a great addition to the Museums Cannot Be Silent series we began last fall. Before we get to housekeeping and introductions, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation, today's program sponsor, for the significant support they have provided to SEMC over this past year to make these programs possible and to allow us to keep them free for all to attend. We will be offering a monthly SEMC program going forward. If you're a corporate member or another entity interested in sponsoring an upcoming program, please contact me. All support is greatly appreciated and helps us cover costs related to producing a virtual program. Also, a big thank you to Banks Creative for our promotional graphics, and to Carla Phillips and Katie Menny, who have helped spread the word on our social media channels. Okay, now a few basic housekeeping notes before I introduce our speaker. This session is being recorded and will be available on SEMC's YouTube channel just as soon as we can get it edited and set up. Closed captioning is available for today's program. Hopefully that worked. If it didn't, it'll be on shortly, but you'll be able to turn it on via the CC button at the bottom of your screen. A written transcript of today's session will also be available just as soon as we can get it edited. I'm certain there will be many questions for Ashley, and I encourage you to put them in the Q&A box so that we can keep track and address them at the end of the program. While this is a Zoom webinar and we have our cameras off, you're all still here, and I encourage you to speak freely and engage with your colleagues in the chat, which will not be captured in the recording. While the C in SEMC stands for conference, it also stands for community, today, tomorrow, and always, and it's so nice to see all of you here. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Ashley Rogers, who has been the Executive Director of Whitney Plantation for the past 2 years. Prior to this role, she served as the Director of Museum Operations at the site. Before joining the Whitney Plantation staff, she was the Assistant Director of Denver Regional Museums at History Colorado. Ashley has a BA in History and Political Science from Warren Wilson College in Asheville, North Carolina. She's also originally from North Carolina, and she has an MA in History and Museum Studies from Colorado State University. She's also currently pursuing a PhD in history at Louisiana State University in her spare time. In reading several of Ashley's bios, she stated that in graduate school she learned to think truly critically and to question things and poke and prod at them, noting that these skills are essential to her work as a historian and ones that she tries to pass along to her employees. I'm certain these skills have also assisted her on her current journey with Whitney Plantation, which opened to the public in 2014 as the only plantation museum in Louisiana with an exclusive focus on slavery. Thank you for being with us today, Ashley.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here with everyone. I am going to go ahead and share my screen, which always confuses me. So give me a second. Go. Are you on my presentation? Is this correct? I'm going to assume yes. Okay, good. All right, good. So I'll just start with a brief introduction about Whitney Plantation if you're not familiar with the site. Whitney Plantation is a museum and memorial site in South Louisiana, and it is focused entirely on the history of slavery. It's on the site of a historical sugarcane, rice, and indigo plantation. And the fields surrounding the plantation, which you can see in that video, are still planted in sugarcane to this day. So it's a very rural area. It's located about an hour between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. We're on 250 acres and we have 16 original buildings. We're very famous for having a wealthy founder who purchased the property from a petrochemical plant, Formosa Chemicals and Plastics Corporation in 1999. And we have been open to the public since 2014. As I said, it's a museum and memorial, so we have a combination of original buildings and memorials on the site. This is one of 4 memorials that visitors can visit called the Field of Angels, with a statue by Moorhead, who's an artist from Mississippi. And this particular memorial records the names of over 2,000 children who died in slavery in St. John the Baptist Parish during the antebellum period. But the other memorials focus on different aspects of slavery in Louisiana. We also have 2 original slave cabins on the site, and then 5 that we brought in from a neighboring parish to give visitors an idea of what slave cabins looked like on a typical Louisiana sugar plantation. But visitors are allowed to go inside of the one original cabin, which was still standing when our founder purchased the property in 1999. We have the original owner's home, which was built in 1790, and you can see here underneath the oak trees. And in the foreground, you can see a statue by Woodrow Nash, who's an artist from Ohio. So Whitney Plantation really combines artwork as well as historical interpretation to kind of come at this topic from different angles. Prior to COVID, visitors came to the site and took hour-and-a-half-long walking tours with a member of our staff, and that was the only way that visitors could view the site. So these are visitors in the first memorial, which is called the Wall of Honor, detailing the names and biographical details about people who were enslaved on that particular plantation. As I was preparing for this presentation, I was looking for anything that would show my work when I first arrived. And I think this is the only picture that shows any indication that I was doing any work right when we first got there. You can see my laptop furiously trying to record what's inside of all these boxes and my coffee cup. This is a warehouse on the site. And when I was hired in August of 2014, our first meeting was to push back the opening from November to December. And at that point, I was one of 2 employees. There was a historian who was the research director and myself. And I was the first person who had been to the site who had any museum experience whatsoever. So from August to December of 2014, I had to work to do everything to get this museum open, from setting up vendor contracts and establishing the gift shop. We hadn't even built the front desk yet. We were still finishing parking lots. There was no furniture inside of any of the structures, and that's what's inside these boxes. These had been purchased at auctions 10 years prior and were sitting in these crates in storage for a decade before I got there. So, we didn't have any other staff either, so I had to hire everyone, create the hours of operation, the admission rates, you name it. It was everything. And we didn't really have a whole lot of time from the time that we opened until this happened, which was March 1st, 2015. An article published in the New York Times Magazine called "Building the First Slavery Museum in America," which was not something that we kind of got credit for being the first slavery museum because of this article. And then journalists kept saying it. And I kept saying, well, actually, so it's very difficult to kind of rein that in. But basically what happened is that this came out March 1st of 2015. So we had only been open for 3 months at that point. We opened on December the 7th, and we were not prepared for what happened as a result of this opening. This was the first time that the museum went viral. This was the most shared article on the New York Times website the week that it came out. It tripled our visitation overnight. And we basically had, no time to figure out how to do this correctly. Our visitation just kept skyrocketing after this point, and the steadily climbing visitation meant that we were basically beholden to visitor needs. We were chronically understaffed, and I never stopped being a tour guide at the site. We had, in 2019, 106,000 visitors, and we had, at that point, 10 tour guides. And remember, the only way that visitors could view the site was with a guided tour. So each tour guide was responsible on average for 10,000 visitors in a year, right? So this was a bit too much. And all of this abruptly stopped, obviously, in March of 2020. This also coincided with another strange change in our museum. Our founder, John Cummings, we had been working on this process for quite a long time. He was the owner for the first 5 years, but we were working on creating a nonprofit that he could donate all of the assets to and building a board of directors. So we had been working on that slowly over the course of several years, and that was finally ready to go in 2019. So he made the donation in December of 2019. And when the pandemic hit, we were only a nonprofit for 3 months. So we had no fundraising base. We had never done any we were totally supported by earned revenue. So earned revenue completely went away, and we had to figure out how to do all of this in a new way, how to still do our programming, what we can be if we're not a site that people can tour, and how we sustain ourselves without that infusion of cash from earned revenue. So we had been working on creating an audio tour since, I'd say the summer of 2019 is when we started that process. And we did receive grant funds for that through the nonprofit. And basically, as soon as we closed, that app or that audio tour was ready to deliver. So we changed our plans and decided to create an app. And this was all done with Acoustiguide, who was partnering with Guru. So we worked over the course of the 3 months that we were closed to turn that audio tour into an app that people could use on their phones, because we were concerned about shared devices, and we wanted to be ready to open up our site whenever we were able to and have people be able to visit the site safely. So these are some screen shares. Actually, if anyone is interested in listening to the audio tour, you can just download the app for free on your phone if you just search for Whitney Plantation. And prior to COVID, we had 20% of our visitors were international. So one thing that I was really proud of with this app was that we got it in 5 additional languages in addition to English. So it has a range of coverage, plus it has full transcription. So for deaf and hard of hearing visitors, they can read the full tour there. So the other thing that this meant during this closure is that this was, it meant that we were we stopped being cornered by our visitation. So that high visitation, that meant that the only thing that we could do was just serve visitors and just do exactly what they needed. And everything that we were doing was driven by visitor concerns. I mean, prior to COVID, my biggest concern was the fact that we didn't have enough bathroom stalls. This was really where my head was. I wasn't able to do any kind of real consideration of programming. Since everything slowed down really significantly, this gave us a little bit more time. So we finally opened back up on Juneteenth of 2020 with a fully self-guided experience, and the audio tour allows for a safe social distance. The visitors, the whole space is 250 acres, and the space that the visitors actually walk around is about 50 acres. So it's a really big site, and there's plenty of space for people to spread out. And this was really a net positive for us. We also found that we were getting a mostly local audience, which makes sense. 85% of our visitors prior to COVID were tourists coming through the New Orleans market. And so because tourism basically doesn't exist, we weren't getting tourists, maybe a little bit of local Louisiana drive-in traffic, but our local parish numbers have gone up in 2020. The other thing that happened during this summer, of course, was, you know, the newest movement for Black Lives Matter. And I'll say that, you know, this summer, a lot of museums released statements and kind of waded into that for the first time. But this was very far from the first time that Black Lives Matter is a concern for us. Obviously, this is kind of baked into our mission. And we found that, you know, when we opened in 2014, it was just a couple months after Michael Brown's murder. And so we were always being considered a resource for people. People were always coming to us, trying to understand the events around them. So our statement that we released for this summer during the protests was more of a reiteration about who we are and how, you know, this is really what we care about, is helping people understand the past of this country so that they can understand the present. In terms of our, you know, our staffing and our board, you know, a lot of museums were really wrestling with that. But again, this is stuff that's really been baked into what we do. You know, our staff is majority people of color, and as is our board. We have descendants from the plantation who work at all levels of the organization, from the front desk to our director of communications. So these are things that are really, really big concerns for us always. So really what Black Lives Matter, with this year's protest about Black Lives Matter, made us think, and the pandemic, is how can we change our programming? How can we offer something more specifically that will help people in this time? So the other thing that happened is that we ended up closing everything, right? And we had closed actually this is the top floor of the big house. We had closed the top floor of the big house since the mid 2019. And so this has already been off limits for a long time, but we went ahead and just closed everything. Because of the long closure and keeping the doors shut and everything like that, we started to have problems in the big house of mold. We were unable to control the temperature or humidity, and maintaining the collections has always been a problem at the site because we don't have a dedicated staff for collections. So since 2020 is this year of everything has changed, you know, we're not doing the same type of programming we were. Suddenly things are possible that weren't possible before because we've basically been reduced to nothing, and we have to kind of figure out where we're going. I started to ask myself, and I started to ask the staff and the board, are we actually a house museum? And I think the answer to that question is no. The other thing, the major part of our programming that we did before were these guided tours, and you can see here, this is obviously before COVID, but you can see how these guided tours look. This is actually on the small end of what these tours looked like. If you can imagine, if you only have 10 tour guides and you have in a day, and that's total, right? So in a whole day, you might have 5 if you're lucky who are working on that day. And you have 500, 600, 700 visitors. You know, the week after Christmas 2019, we had 950 visitors in a day. So those tours started to get really, really big. They were 35 people, 40 people. Those tours stopped being useful, right? I mean, there's only so much that you can kind of do with those visitors if all you're trying to do is just hustle them through as fast as you can so that you can get the next group in. And especially with our content, I mean, that really turned out to be a kind of a big problem, that some people were getting a great experience there, but not everyone. And oftentimes what was happening is that people would feel rushed. We knew that from surveying. They felt rushed, even if they were on the grounds for an hour and 45 minutes, which is over what the tour was supposed to be. It was supposed to be an hour and 30. They felt rushed because the guide is constantly saying, we have to move on, we have to move on. And then they get dropped off in the visitor center, and that guide has to turn around and just do another tour right away. So it's not really good for the guide. And the visitor is left kind of with these feelings and nowhere to put them. You know, maybe they're talking to their family on their way home, but a lot of people came on tour buses. 40% of our visitors came with a major tour company. And that could be a very strange experience for people with no way to process everything that they just learned. In addition to that, during COVID, I mean, we still can't operate guided tours. It's not allowed under the restrictions. And so, you know, at least we had this app to roll out, but basically the way that I've been thinking about this programming is that we have two areas of concern. We have information delivery, and then we have this other thing, right, which is connection, conversation, reflection. And our self-guided tour is handling the information delivery. This is giving people the history, and it's teaching them about the content that we deal with there on the grounds. But this other problem of encouraging reflection and connection and conversation, especially this year because of COVID, and especially this year because of Black Lives Matter, we started to really feel like those were more necessary than ever. You know, I think a lot of people came to us and have come to us over the last 5 years because they wanted to hear something that they already thought was true, if that makes sense. And one thing that I noticed over many years of giving these tours is that the smaller the group, the more likely it was that they would talk amongst themselves and bring something of themselves to the experience. And also the more likely it was that they actually absorbed things. You know, I mean, I think that what happens if you're in a group of 40 people and you're coming here to hear something and you maybe already have it in your brain, what you're going to learn is that you just walk away with the same thing you walked in there with. And we're really interested in how we can help people kind of move through this world that we're all living in and understand the things that they're seeing around them, but also form connections with other people. Because I think that people don't really talk very often out there in the wild. They don't really talk across lines of ethnicity, race, age, right? And these are things that we were seeing happen in our visitor center all the time, that there's something about the experience at Whitney that was opening people up. So we really wanted to encourage that as much as we could. So now our focus for 2021 is in overhauling the in-person experience completely and being responsive to what we think visitors need and what they've been asking for. We're hoping to roll this out by the end of 2021. So we're working with Sarah Ferrone from Dialogic Consulting, who was previously from the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. And she's going to be working with us to create an entirely new program that's focused on facilitated dialogue, so that when we do return with in-person visits and a more guided experience towards the end of 2021, that we'll do so in very small groups. We haven't really set this up yet, but I'm imagining not more than 7 people participating in the group, that it would be a longer, more in-depth experience, and that it will be entirely based in dialogue. While we're still simultaneously running this self-guided tour. So then we have these two experiences. We have the learning and the education delivery, but if people want something a bit more that they can reflect and bring more of their whole selves to, then we have that as well. And where the issue about the house museum, are we a house museum, comes into this, is because we need facilitation space on the grounds. It's not something that we currently have. And so I've talked with the staff and I've talked with the board and gotten everybody kind of on board here that our plan is to actually liquidate everything in the house. The house contains a lot of antiques that are not original to the plantation. And it really felt increasingly like we were kind of swimming upstream, trying to hold on to this idea of something that we weren't. You know, that house is never going to be the point of what we do. And the problem with visitors is that they would get to the house and they would be completely distracted by everything inside of it. They were also causing structural problems. You know, the reason why we shut down the top floor in 2019 is because we started to see cracking all on the bottom floor. And that was a major concern for us. So we're still in the process of planning exactly how we're going to use that space. We are still going to use the big house, but it's going to be totally repurposed so that it doesn't remain kind of a shrine to the owning family, but instead becomes more of a living, breathing space where people can kind of talk about these issues. And my hope is that this new experience will not only get people talking, but that it will deliver something that the guided tours couldn't ever do, which is these heart-opening experiences. My guiding principle with all of this is asking, how are we changing the world? And if all we're doing is being a plantation tour that's a little bit different, then we might as well shut our doors tomorrow because there's nothing interesting there. There's no real work. So I'm most interested in how we can use our plantation and our museum as a space to encourage this kind of change in thinking.
Ashley, quick question. One of the attendees would like to know what we're seeing in this photo.
Oh, sorry. This is one of our memorials, which is the Gwendolyn Midlow Hall, named in honor of a historian who she created a database of all of the people enslaved in Louisiana for the first 100 years, and that's what you're seeing here. We've taken the names from that database and put them here on a memorial. And I'm actually I'm finished up here, so if there, I haven't even looked in here, but if there are questions, then I'm happy to answer questions.
Yes. I'm just going to start with the list here, but could you just go over who did the app real quick, remind everybody?
Yeah, so to create the audio tour, we worked with Acoustiguide, and then Acoustiguide contracted with Guru is the name of the development company that created the app.
Acoustiguide. Okay, I'll put a link in the chat in a minute. Another question is, who was involved in the conversations about Are We a House Museum?
So that would be myself and our entire staff and our entire board. So yeah.
Okay. Here's one about what is the training program like for tour guides? How are tour guides trained to handle aggressive or combative lines of questioning from visitors, or is this not usually an issue?
First of all, it's not really an issue, but also the training is what we did before is not what we're doing anymore, because the experience that we're going to be creating to roll out at the end of this year is not the same. So what we're looking at doing, and we're still in the planning phases of how we're going to do these trainings. We're going to be working with, as I mentioned, Sarah Ferrone, who's going to do some training with our staff on this new program. We're also going to work with Sites of Conscience to do dialogue training. And we're also looking for, but we have not decided upon yet, somebody to do some trauma-informed training. So, you know, one of the things is that most people, it's funny, I get this type of question quite a bit. And I think it kind of speaks to a fear that a lot of people have about interpreting slavery or interpreting, you know, Jim Crow or anything like that. And I'm not going to say that there are no people who are difficult who come on the tour. But I will say that most people are gracious and interested. And it's very, very, very rare that we get anyone at all who is even rude. You know, it just doesn't happen, let alone combative. Most people who come to the site are thankful. And even, you know, there's a more traditional plantation up the road from us, Oak Alley Plantation. They've been around since the 70s. Lots and lots and lots of people go to Oak Alley Plantation. And when they surveyed their visitors years ago, they found that even most of their visitors were interested to know about slavery. Now, that said, you know, one of the things that we're going to be working on in this new process is really empowering our guides, our interpreters, and setting them up to create a safe space for conversation. The other thing is that this program that we're going to be doing is going to be an opt-in, right? So not everybody is going to do it. People who want that experience are going to do it. And so I think that's going to be sort of a self-selecting group. We've run, you know, virtual programs where we have conversations with the general public, and, you know, every single one of them has been really a beautiful conversation, really. And we've had people in the conversations thank us for creating kind of a safe space where they can talk.
Thank you. All right, questions are rolling in now. Let's see. So this one was, would love to hear more about who will be facilitating the small group experiences and discussions. If it's museum staff, is there a training they will take? If not, how do you find and vet the contracted facilitators?
Right. So again, this is going to be with our existing staff, and we have not yet done the training for them. They all obviously know what we're going to be doing, and they're going to be involved in the creation of the program as well, because these are the people who are really the experts in interpreting on that site. We have a incredibly dedicated core of interpreters, several of whom have been there for 4 or 5 years, almost since the beginning. These are not people who previously had museum experience, and none of them that I know of had any background in history, but all of them have been really, really dedicated to the mission and have done incredible work. So we're going to start the program with them. And the other thing is that we're only going to offer the program as often as we have competent interpreters to do it, right? So we're not going to any longer do this thing where we're kind of like, we have to deliver this. It's going to be a more specialized program. And then from there, so this is, we're imagining that we're sort of rolling this out and testing it in this first maybe year. And then our goal after that is to annually run like a recruitment drive where we bring in a cohort of people to move through a training process and retrain our existing interpreters and do it that way. But again, only offering it as much as we have the people who can do it.
Okay. More about facilitated discussion groups. Are you concerned about hosting facilitated discussion groups within the house space? Do you think that might be a space that is uncomfortable for some visitors because of its history?
Yeah, I've thought about that for sure. But it's important to remember that this is going to be a program that takes place over the entire site. So this is not going to be just, we go into the big house and we're going to spend 2 hours in there. That is going to be one space where we're going to use the interior space, but we also have other spaces throughout the grounds, and they're going to see everything on the grounds and spend most of their time outside, just as in the traditional tour. So, you know, it won't be exclusive to that space.
Okay. Let's see, where are we? Okay, assuming you identify as white yourself, have you had any pushback about being in charge of telling the story?
From myself, for sure, something that I think about quite a lot. But the other thing is that I don't think that I'm in charge of telling this story. I don't agree with that. This is something that, you know, I am often the person who's invited to talk, but I am far from the only person who is actually on the site doing the work. And the person who's in charge of actually training the interpreters and working with the interpreters on a day-to-day basis is our director of operations, who is an African-American woman. Most of our guides are African-American as well. And so, and also we have descendants who are involved in this process. So it's a little bit more collaborative than that. I'm trying to provide kind of a vision here for where this is going to go. And I think that that vision is responsive to what our visitors have asked for and what they need. But, you know, I'm certainly aware of my positionality as a person who is a white woman who is the head of this organization. I also report to a board that is 6 out of 8, or actually 8 out of 10 African American. So again, this is a collaborative process.
Thank you for your candor on that front. That is, I know those many who are in charge probably find themselves in similar situations. So now the next question, what has been the impact of Whitney on the community?
Well, it depends on how you define the community. You know, our immediate geographic community is an interesting one. It's very small. We have 400 people in our town. They are pretty much all descendants from that plantation. And we have done work in and with the community, which is ongoing. We have been running a pretty consistent, for the past 4 years, ongoing oral history project, trying to document the history of the town and the history of the area and forging connections in that way. And in 2020, we have instituted a policy of having free admission for people from St. John Parish, but it is a hard thing to try to get residents from around that area to come on the tour. And I don't necessarily even know that that's what I want from that community. And the reason I say that is because these are all people who are from that plantation, right? I mean, I'm not under any pretenses that they're anxious to come back to a place that their parents or grandparents worked, because the plantation was in operation until 1975. So prior to COVID, I was beginning a process of some, community focus groups to figure out what else we could do in that community that would actually be helpful and useful. And all of that has been kind of put on hold because of a massive restriction in our budget and also inability to kind of gather people in person. So we're still waiting to see exactly where we can be of service. That's really the way that I think about it, beyond, doing those kinds of typical museum things.
I guess too, at this point, and could you just review how large your staff is and like what the positions are that you have focused on building at this point?
Yeah, so we have a really small staff. It is the leadership team is myself and a director of operations, a director of communication, director of research. Yeah, and then we have an operations manager. So that's pretty much the staff. And then beyond that, everybody else is an interpreter. So we have a total staff of, at this point, 13. And that includes that whole leadership team. And then everybody else is more frontline. So sometimes we kind of give the impression of being a much larger organization than we are. But yeah, so some of these things are a little bit difficult just because we're so tiny.
Small and powerful, definitely. Okay, let's dig into this question from James Blair. With the choice to remove the collection from the big house, will the house become more of a gallery with exhibits on those enslaved that worked in the house? And how many people were enslaved on Whitney Plantation?
Super good question. So, I'm figuring out what we're going to do, because the whole space is not going to be programming space. And I should say, nothing in there is accessioned either. Not only are they not original, but like we've never had a collections manager, so it's not really a collection that much. But I have been considering for some time converting the bottom floor for use as an exhibit to change it over to an exhibit that's focused on enslaved domestics, which is actually how that space was interpreted on the guided tour. So most of that on the bottom floor is service space. And we have things that we've never shown the public. So we actually have, the only real collection that we have are archaeological materials that were taken from the area where the slave cabins used to be, which is land that we no longer own and can't access anymore. And that was taken during Section 106 review when the petrochemical plant opened, when they were trying to open a rayon plant on the site. And when our founder purchased the property, we got all of these archaeological materials. So there's actually great potential to build an exhibit that's really specifically focused on the material lives of people who were enslaved there. All of those things are on the table. I don't think I'm going to even figure this out this year, but we're working on it. And in total, in terms of the number of people who we've documented to be enslaved on the site, over 110 years, there were about 350. The largest that it ever was 120 people at one time. And that was in the 1840s, I believe.
Just curious, but the collections that you do have, you store them on site somehow? As a former collections manager, I'm just curious.
Somehow, don't come and look at what it looks like, but I do have them.
Nobody wants to let anybody into their storage spaces. Okay, have you collaborated with museums and cultural institutions in the nearby metro areas of Baton Rouge and New Orleans?
We haven't, but again, I mean, this is mostly just because we didn't have time. I mean, I really can't emphasize enough the degree to which we could not do anything until 2020. We just, for 5 years, basically couldn't take a breath. And the only thing that we could do is just try to, keep the visitor center looking relatively clean for the hundreds of people who are going to come in a day. So 2020 has been an interesting year for that as well. Suddenly we're getting people who are reaching out to us, and we've had more collaboration opportunities, which we very much welcome, and we actually have the time to do those things. So we are currently working with the Southern Food and Beverage Museum. They're going to be putting together an exhibit about slavery, food ways of enslaved people, and our staff is working with them on that. And there's a kind of a project with UNO for Freedom on the Move, if anybody's familiar with that, but that's a project documenting self-liberating people, and we've been collaborating with them on that. So there's been increased opportunities this year.
Again, just with capacity, that's sort of why I asked about the small staff and how much can be done at one time. And just a sort of update on the earlier question about what has been the impact of Whitney on the community. Nicole Moore, who asked the question, was actually referring to the surrounding community and descendant community. So I think you.
Yeah, I mean, hi, Nicole. So one thing that's interesting is that I always feel weird talking about her when she's not here, but Joy Banner, who's our director of communications, is a descendant from the site. And one thing that's like kind of cool and interesting is that she's been kind of using her space at Whitney to create some programming in the community on her own. So she created a Coming to the Table group, which I've attended there, and it's it's been really cool. Just very small groups of people who are from there talking about these issues. Maybe, for the first time in that kind of setting. I think this is something that a lot of people don't talk about that much. And she's also, with her sister, they started a cafe right up the road from us on their family's land that they've had for, since the 19th century. And they serve coffee and beignets. And it's like this wonderful little compliment to Whitney because it allows people who have, left Whitney Plantation, we don't have anything like that, and they can go to this business, which is Black owned, right in the community, and kind of have a little time for conversation. They've planted a tree in honor of their enslaved ancestor, who was the first person to come there, and they have this little, she's created kind of like an interpretation trail with their family folklore out front. So it's really cool. I cannot take credit for what she's done, but I kind of think that having Whitney there has been influential in that respect.
And as you say, having a space to go to kind of reflect in a completely different way, over food within a different community is important. Are your interpreters volunteer or paid?
They're paid, actually. We don't have any unpaid positions whatsoever because Whitney Plantation was a site of stolen labor for over 200 years. And so we do not have volunteers and we do not have interns, unpaid interns either. It's not something that I believe in, and I don't think that it aligns with our mission. So everyone is paid. And that's actually something that is going to be going into this program development, is that interpreters are going to be paid more to do this new program, with the understanding that what I'm asking them to do is harder.
I think hopefully more and more museums will go the way of the paid internships and that route.
Mm-hmm.
So another question from Kyle Booker: who is your main audience?
Well, so as I said, I mean, it's mostly tourists. So like whoever comes to, let me back up. New Orleans, Louisiana is a town of about 400,000 residents. And in 2019, it got 20 million visitors. Okay, so this is like a massive tourist destination. We are 50 miles west of New Orleans. And so if you look at who comes to New Orleans, who comes to Whitney Plantation is kind of a cross section of that, basically. In terms of demographics, our visitors skew younger than traditional museums. So the largest share of our visitors are in the kind of young adult millennial age group, not a majority, but the largest share. White people are not in the majority of our visitors. We have about 40-ish% African-American visitors and about 49% white visitors. And the rest is a share of everyone else. So it's a really diverse audience in that respect. And as I said, a lot of people are international as well. So we have about 20% of people who do not live in the United States. The most of them are Anglophone, or not, excuse me, Francophone people. So we get a lot of visitors from Canada, and we also get a lot of visitors from France because they come to explore kind of the French history of Louisiana. But we truly get visitors from all over the world, from the Caribbean, from Africa, all over Europe, Asia. So it's a wild audience. It's everyone.
So this wasn't a question in the Q&A, but it's just from me. How are you finding that people find out about you?
Like, word of mouth, which is it's like the same as everyone. Like, it's funny. I mean, we have a pretty strong following on social media. We have like over 30,000 followers on Instagram and 40,000 or so on Facebook, and we get consistent media attention. We've just had 2 more articles come out in the last month. And so I would expect with all of that people would be finding out about us through those channels, but through surveying, that's not the case. They're finding out because a friend or family member told them. So
who does your social media? I think I've seen a couple comments in the chat about it's how wonderful it is, and it's great.
It's good. It's like social media is hard. It's been like difficult for us to kind of like find the right formula there, but our director of communications is in charge of it, Joy. And, but we also, one of the things we did in COVID is we tried to identify things that our interpreters were good at that they could do that weren't interpreting, since they can't give tours. So one of our interpreters is a writer professionally, and she also has a master's degree in Caribbean history. So we made her research and write all of the social media posts. So now we're paying her to do it, and Joy is still doing a whole lot of it because it just is so much to keep up with.
Okay, so this was a comment, and we'll see if you just have a thought on it. But Troy Overton wrote, "Just a thought, having visited Drayton Hall Plantation near Charleston, South Carolina, the main house there has never been furnished. The focus is on the architecture and the enslaved craftsmen who built it. It also allows the docents to focus more on the lives of the people who actually lived there. This is a really interesting perspective, and I think your plans for Whitney really open wonderful possibilities." Then he wrote, "Good luck with this."
Oh, thank you. Well, Drayton Hall I've actually never visited in person, but I have known about it for a long time and always kind of liked that approach. But yeah, I'm hoping that people will be not as distracted by furniture.
Okay, questions are still rolling in, so I'm going to keep going here. Rebecca Bush asks, "The primary role of so many nonprofit boards, for better and for worse, is fundraising. But Whitney was established with a different structure and is now transitioning. How are you thinking about balancing revenue sources, and will the board's responsibilities shift at all as a result?"
Yes, unfortunately, the board's role has shifted. We recruited a bunch of people and told them that they would not have to raise money, and then almost immediately said, "Just kidding, you do have to raise money." But we were also strategic in who we picked. We don't have a board model where people are I don't have a dollar amount that they have to contribute in order to be on the board. But I picked people who knew what they were doing, right? I picked people who were smart and who had a lot of experience. So one of our board members has really, really deep nonprofit experience in Louisiana through museums and historic preservation, and knows a lot about grant cycles locally. Another one is a ED of a local nonprofit, the Ellis Marcellus Center in New Orleans. And then one of them works for a foundation and previously worked for Kellogg Foundation, and is now, he's in health, but knows a lot of people. So we were actually, it was very fortunate, and we were able to kind of use some of those networks this year to start a fundraising campaign. So we got our first ever grants this year, and we're able to raise, a few $100,000 just from doing that. And we are still bringing in revenue, just not as much revenue as we need to actually operate the site.
Just want to read one of the comments in the chat was, hold on, I can't see it now, sorry. COVID sounds like it was a blessing in some ways, for your vision, for your future, just in terms of all of the opportunities that it's allowing to, not that we can call COVID a blessing in any way, but if you're going to find a silver lining, it sounds like it was a stopping point for you to think forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it allowed me to kind of take some time and think creatively. I got to have a lot of, input and conversations with our staff that I very much appreciated. And yeah, I agree. I mean, it's been very difficult financially, honestly, but we're going to make it through. And I think that we're going to come out the other end a little bit stronger. And we're also able this year with some grant money to hire our first ever education manager. So we're going to be doing that hopefully by April of this year, to start creating an actual educational experience on site for students that'll be completely different. So I'm excited about these opportunities.
So speaking of financials, it kind of rolls into this next question. So is your plan to increase your staff size, this is from Matt Davis, to align with your new programming and interpretation?
No. So we are only, the only position that is going to be an actual increase is that education manager. That's going to be someone who doesn't currently work for us. Other than that, I am only hiring people who already are in our ecosystem. So either moving people up within the organization or bringing them back, because some people have been furloughed this year. And so my concern first and foremost is with our existing staff and making sure that we're giving them opportunities first. Also, I think it would be a big ask to get someone to come into this program that is brand new and they're new to the site and figure out how to do it. I really want to lean on the experience of my existing core of interpreters and get their expertise in building the program and running the program and making sure that it's successful before I bring anybody else into that process.
I just love how sure the way your plans for the future are confident and assured and staff driven, and it's nice. Thank you. Okay, so moving on, we'll see what you do with this question. Ashley Johnson would like to know, why is Whitney the only plantation and museum in Louisiana with an exclusive focus on slavery? I understand that slavery is a sensitive topic, but I'm still surprised that there are not more museums or plantations focusing on it. Wonder if you have a comment on that.
Excellent question. I mean, I have no idea. I don't think that's unusual. I think that, that's been how, a lot of these plantations opened there was a wave of plantations opening for tourism in the 1930s, right? And this whole Gone with the Wind thing. And then there's another wave of plantations that are opening in the 60s. And there becomes this kind of backlash against civil rights and this kind of bizarre nostalgia for, the old South, right? And this narrative of the lost cause and Moonlight Magnolias. And that was incredibly compelling for a lot of people, a lot of white people, right? So these plantation sites were oftentimes opened explicitly just to, kind of marvel at the big house and do that. And I think that, that's true in Louisiana, but that is true all over the South. Growing up in North Carolina and going to places that were sites of slavery, it was always, come and look at all of the paintings of these people, and then we will maybe mention the fact that there were enslaved people here, but it'll just be a passing mention because that's just not the point, right, of that kind of tourism, even though that is the point of a plantation. A plantation only exists to enslave people. That's the only reason it's there. But, that's not what these plantation sites were founded to do. And we are not the only place in Louisiana where you can hear about enslavement. There's the River Road African American Museum, which long predates our existence. And we're not the only site in the country. There's Sean's site, McLeod in South Carolina, that does a great job. And a lot of sites actually in Louisiana do a pretty good job of interpreting slavery, even if their focus is still really more centered on the owning family. Oak Alley Plantation has done a tremendous job in reinterpreting their space and changing what they do there. And much to their credit, I think are doing a really, really good job. And Laura Plantation, just up the road from us, has done well. Evergreen, right next door, has just released an entire database of all the people who were enslaved there. So, we're far from the only people talking about it, but we are the only site that's exclusively focused on it, in such that, I'm considering getting rid of everything in the big house. We just don't do that.
Well, I know when you and I first talked to about doing the session, you mentioned the fact that because you opened with the mission to focus on enslaved people, the Whitney maybe doesn't have some of the reinterpretation challenges that many other plantations in the Southeast might face.
Yeah.
Okay, just a couple more questions. We're nearing the end, everybody. Thank you all. These have been great questions. Appreciate it. And COVID aside, how has the transition to a nonprofit changed how you operate, if at all? And this was from Nicole Moore.
Hi, Nicole. Once again. It hasn't really changed the operations. We're the same organization that we were before, pretty much. But I think it makes our lives easier. Certainly in terms of accountability, public perception. Somebody asked earlier, like, what is it like? Do I get pushback for being the white person in charge of this organization? Well, yes, and like, we're so famous for having this wealthy white founder that there is a perception, doesn't matter what's true or not, right? There's a perception that this is a place where it's white people still profiting off of slavery. And so even though that was never the case, he was never drawing any money from this place, put $10 million of his own money into restoring it and opening it to the public. That doesn't matter, right? It's about public perception. And so it's really, really important for us to be able to say, this entire organization, everything we do here is nonprofit. A lot of plantation sites actually divorce that. So they have one side that's a nonprofit and another side that's for profit. And everything there is really in support of the mission. So that's been way easier this year. It's been really nice when people ask that question, where does my money go? And like, to be able to say, this is an educational institution and all of your money is supporting delivering this to other people around the world.
And just before we move on to the last question, this was kind of backtracking from an earlier one, but how do you deal with the remnants of the lost cause?
I don't really. I mean, to be honest, I just kind of don't give any like headspace to any of that. Where it touched us, I think a little bit was when the memorials, the Confederate memorials came down in New Orleans. There was this like conservative blog that did a kind of like a hit piece where they said, there's an anonymous donor who gave the money to remove those statues. And this blog came out and said it was the founder of Whitney Plantation. And furthermore, that the founder of Whitney Plantation was going to move all of those statues out to Whitney, which is not something we would ever do. So, we get kind of dragged into it a little bit. Again, people are kind of looking around for answers. But it's just not something that I give any kind of time to. Our point there, our purpose there is to tell the truth and to respect our audience, and to do our work with grace, right? And so, just the same as this, this question, how are we changing the world, right? I don't want to get caught up on all of those things that we're not. This is not a space for white guilt. White guilt is not a productive thing. I don't give space to that. I don't give space to the lost cause, because my focus is on what we are and what we're teaching people.
Thank you. All right, these last two questions are more or less education related. In terms of disseminating information, do you have local school groups visit, and how do you tackle those difficult conversations with them?
Yeah, so this is why we're creating an education program. We have not been courting school groups since we've been open, because we don't have resources. Nobody on staff is an educator. I don't have a background in museum education. That's not my strong suit. And so basically the only resource that we've had is just to deliver the same tour that we give to adults, and maybe change some of the language to make it a little bit easier for these kids. But it's not really doing anything for them. It's difficult. It's a long tour. They're outside. It's hot. They have to pay attention the whole time. And some classes are really into it and some classes aren't. So it's been a challenge. The local school has come. We have, very, very tiny local school, and they've come a few times. But school groups traditionally were only 6% of our visitation. So this was not huge. And we've halted school group visitation entirely, obviously, because you can't come in a group at all. So that's why I'm wanting to, or I will be creating this position, and that person for a full year, their only job basically is going to be to research and create this program for in-person, which I'm hoping that maybe by 2022, like fall 2022, we could roll out in test form if things go well.
Okay, and then you've answered a lot of questions. We're also appreciative. So we'll do this as the final question for this session. Okay, it's sort of multi-part here. In your tours or educational materials, do you make direct connections to current events or the present day? I know you said you're focused on how the past affects the present, but do you explicitly discuss those connections with your visitors? Or do the interpreters suggest ways that visitors can dismantle current systems of injustice that are the legacy of enslavement?
So the actual tour, the audio tour that we do, is totally focused on slavery and the history of that site. However, our mission, remember, our site was operating until 1975. And our mission is to educate the public about the history of slavery and its legacies. So that is very much a part of what our mission is, but it's not in that core kind of information delivery, the history of this plantation. That is something that I want to be involved in this newer in-depth program, because making those concrete connections is really, really important, I think. And, for me, one way that we have done that a little bit is we have an exhibit in the visitor center that focuses on the history of the plantation after slavery. And there are these really, really, compelling economic legacies, right? Of the last families that left the plantation in 1975, their families had been there since slavery, and so then the plantation closes and they walk off the plantation, and that's over 150 years of work on this site for which they have no material wealth gained. That's a really, really concrete connection to the past. And those are the kinds of connections that I really want to draw for our visitors through this programming.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to end, just being respectful of your time. And Ashley's done, I think, 3 Zooms today. So the fact that you just gave us a full hour plus is really, I am so appreciative. I know that we had almost 100 attendees on this call, which is wonderful. And, you know, I contacted you. One, I'm so glad to have Whitney Plantation back in SCMC's fold as an institutional member. And also because in so many conversations that we had over the fall, your site continued to come up in conversation about an institution that was doing the work and was addressing the tough topics and in integrating social justice into all operational aspects. And so I'm so thankful that we had you today, that people were able to ask questions. I'm so grateful again for your honesty and your candor. I know you've been probably feel like you've been in the hot seat for the last 45 minutes. But everybody's just thanking you effusively in the chat, and thank you all for attending today. Appreciative of all of your time too. Our next program for SCMC will be February the 16th. This is a session we're doing jointly with the Southeastern Art Museum Directors Consortium about deaccessioning. So this will be a very frank conversation with a panel of museum directors about that topic, which is another hot button one in our industry at present, especially now. So thank you all for being here. Enjoy the rest of your day. Ashley, thank you again so much. And we'll see everybody soon.
Thank you.